Hello, everybody. Welcome back to Paddock Project. I'm your host, Tiggy, and joining me today is Grace, part of our team, and also Dr. Emma Ross from the Well HQ. We are so excited to chat today. Emma, you have done so much in your career. You are the science brains behind the Well HQ, but you've also been the head of physiology for the English Institute of Sport, leading sports scientists, supporting Olympic, Paralympic athletes. You have started and are the sort of fearless leader of the Well HQ, and we're excited to dig into all the details there. But you've also put out a driver development guide for F1 Academy in conjunction with them. So we're really excited to talk about sort of the science behind that and everything that went into the making of that, because it's really amazing. So kudos to you for doing that. But welcome to the podcast. We're super excited to chat.
Yeah, I'm super excited to be here.
Amazing. Well, maybe just to start, you have had such an incredible career in science, in sports, including, like we were mentioning, working directly with Olympic athletes. Why did you choose this career path? What do you love about it? What led you into this world?
I mean, I don't think I could ever have predicted I would be doing what I'm doing, but I absolutely think I'm doing what I'm meant to be doing. So
It's
I
the best.
started I started off after I did a sports science degree, and then I did a master's, and then I did a PhD in physiology and sport and exercise physiology. And after that, I was a researcher and an academic for about another 8 years. So I was teaching students, I was supervising research projects, and really working in the world of sports science academia. And I always had a sense that there was a bit of a disconnect from the real world. And that's kind of natural for academia, but it kind of was bugging me in terms of the impact of my work. And I didn't feel like it was having enough impact to the people who were, doing sport and exercise. And so I was really fortunate to be asked to go and lead the Olympic and Paralympic sports science team after the 2012 Olympics. So obviously in this country, we hosted the Olympics, and it was our best Olympic Games. And afterwards, there was more money and kind of more challenge and ambition put into that system. And so it was an amazing time to go into kind of the world of applied sports science. And it was really kind of fulfilling that appetite I had to work closer to the kind of end user. And I was in charge of a group of sports scientists who work with coaches and athletes across the Olympic and Paralympic program. And I think what that job really helped me to do was understand the determinants of success for such hugely varied sports. So I would be working with sailing one week, and then cycling another week,
Wow.
and then swimming and boxing, and really to understand the physical and the physiological determinants of success for such different sports was really, it was a great personal kind of development journey for me. And then after the Rio Olympics, so as you know, in Olympic sport, we work in Olympic cycles, and we were doing a debrief after Rio in 2016, and thinking, how do we, we were the first country to do better in the Olympics following our home Olympics games and get more medals. And so we were obviously on this trajectory, and there was a lot of pressure to what can we do to stay, successful and stay at the top of, towards the top of the medal table. And so I kind of put forward what I thought was a very, very simple but very fundamental question, which was, do we think we support our female athletes well enough?
Mm.
And we had lots of very successful female athletes in that system. But in my work there over the previous kind of 4 or 5 years, I hadn't heard us talking about them as females and about any female specific issues that might need to address differently in a woman versus a man. And so I felt like we were really good at preparing athletes for peak performance, but we weren't necessarily good at understanding them as males or females. So the first bit of that work was kind of 6 months of real investigation about what we did do. Why was it even necessary to look at athletes as females and males? Was there any merit in it? Did it give us any performance advantage? What were the topics that we weren't covering? What didn't we know we didn't know, and all of that stuff. And I kind of came out of that 6 months saying, there is such huge opportunity here. We haven't really been doing it particularly well. And these topics, things like menstrual health, breast health, pelvic health, attitudes toward fueling in girls, injury prevalence in females, these are the foundations and fundamentals of athlete health and performance. They're not marginal gains. They're like the basics of keeping these girls happy, healthy, and performing well. So for the following Olympic cycle leading up to Tokyo, we did lots of work in that area, and I led the program called Smart Her, which was really getting smarter about supporting her. Um, and then that led us up to Tokyo, and by that point, I had found my sort of vocation in terms of women's sport and really trying to drive equity in the support of female athletes. And I knew I wanted to step out of that role in Olympic sport and sort of broaden the reach of that work. So yeah, in 2020 to 2021, we set up the Well HQ, which was really designed to address a lot of the gender gaps within sport, particularly around educating coaches, sports science practitioners, the athletes themselves, parents, around some of these female specific factors, really raising the bar in terms of what we know in sport about women. And yeah, really driving equity, whether it's a girl doing sport because she loves it when she's a teenage girl and not dropping out, because we know that girls drop out at twice the rate of boys here in the UK,
Mm.
right through to keeping women in sport for across their whole life, particularly at different ages and stages, like postnatally and in menopause, but also thinking about high performance environments and how we can shape those so that girls and women can really thrive within them. That's a potted
That's in-
history for you.
that's incredible. And I think to your point, like it sounds like a simple question of how are male and female athletes different, but it's incredible to me that people don't think about this more often. And I think the work you're doing around that is so important. Maybe just for the you might laugh at this question, but for the sake of our audience, can you define physiology for us so that everybody kind of is on the same page on what exactly that term means?
Yeah, Tiggy, for so long, my parents thought I was a physiotherapist. So I completely get the need to. They're like, I have a sore back. I was like, that's not what I do.
Yeah.
So yeah, physiology and particularly human physiology is essentially our biology, but it's the interaction of all of our biological systems that work together to allow us to, and it could be healthy, and there's the physiology of health, or in my case, to perform really well. And the physiological determinants of performance are things like, cardiovascular function, pulmonary lung function, muscle function, neuromuscular function, and then how all those things work together to allow
Wow.
us to do sport. And as I said previously, like different sports require different physiological systems to be finely tuned.
And to also go with physiology, can you talk about the general ways, either like physical or mental or anything, that female bodies differ from male bodies in athletic activity in general?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question because there are things that are really obvious. Like men are generally taller, they have more muscle mass, they have heavier heads, they have stronger necks, probably really important for when you're driving.
Mhm.
Um, they have bigger hearts, they have bigger lungs, so they have a greater kind of aerobic capacity. And so there are fundamental differences between the genders that are just purely biologically driven. There are some skeletal differences, like we have wider hips as women because we have to birth babies. And that's not just to do with our skeleton, because it has a knock on effect to all of our biomechanics, so how our body moves. Um, and then there's what I think is more interesting is some of the things that happen either uniquely or differently in a female body. So only someone born with a female reproductive system will have a menstrual cycle and will have periods. Only
Mhm.
females develop breast tissue during puberty. That means they need breast support when they're doing sport. Um, Women have much more dysfunction of pelvic floor than men, and that can lead to injury risk. That can lead to biomechanical issues um, in female athletes. Women and girls have a much higher prevalence of dysfunctional relationships with food, and so fueling as a high performance athlete can be more tricky for females, mainly because of the sociological stereotypes of the ideal body type and the stereotypes of what's not attractive in inverted commas for women, being strong and powerful, which seems ridiculous, but that's what
Yeah.
girls have been sold. And that has a knock-on relationship to how they eat, how they view food, and how they fuel. We know that girls and women are up to 8 times more likely to suffer a knee injury than their male counterparts. And the reasons for that are really complex, but are a lot to do with things that we can change. So they're to do with things like the training history of girls doesn't tend to be kind of reliant on things like strength training and strength and conditioning, because again, the guys and boys gravitate to gyms when they're younger. They want to be muscly and they want to get strong, and girls don't necessarily. So the training history can have an impact. How our physiology and our muscles are activated naturally, given our skeletons, sort of increases our risk. But again, we can train that to be better. And so there are kind of things that are just inherently different between men and women. Like, we can't make women taller or have bigger hearts. Like, those are kind of, and those are some of the reasons why we have men's and women's sports in some cases, because it just makes sport safe and fair to have those categories. But there are some things that I just think are really interesting that happen exclusively or differently in female bodies that have been really they haven't, not enough attention has been paid to them. So we have very little understanding of them. When I started this work, we didn't know how the menstrual cycle impacted an athlete in terms of sports performance. We know more now because there's been more research. But when we know how powerful hormones are and how they affect decision making, coordination, appetite, metabolism, energy, like risk taking, hormones can affect all of those things. So when a female has hormones that are fluctuating across the menstrual cycle, like, that's going to really influence how she shows up as an athlete, and can sometimes be a challenge for her unless she knows how to navigate that. So those are where I think the differences between male and female athletes become really exciting opportunities for supporting women better in sport and for them getting more out of their performance.
Absolutely. I mean, it feels like that's quite complex in terms of the differences and how you go from sort of the science to actually how you implement that in training programs. Like, how do you take all of that knowledge and the differences between the two and then figure out how female athletes should train differently? Like, are there different ways that female athletes should train because of that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think people have been asking that a lot, because when you think there's an opportunity to train better or to get better adaptation, you're going to take it. And as a coach or an athlete, you're like, tell me how to train. And if it's to do with the menstrual cycle, tell me how to train across my menstrual cycle so I can get the most out of it. And it won't be surprising that actually as humans, we're all quite different in how we respond to even to our own hormonal signals. And so it's not quite as straightforward as that. And there has been a move to try and say, oh, well, girls, if you're in this part of your cycle, you need to do this exercise. I think where we've got to, in our understanding of the science and actually the lived experience of girls and women, is fundamentally not enough girls or women understand their experience of the menstrual cycle. Like, when do they feel more motivated? When do they feel more inclined to take risks? When do they feel more kind of robust in their relationships and communication with a coach, and then at other times more fragile? And really understand what that looks like. I've worked with skill athletes and target athletes whose coordination is affected across their menstrual cycle. And even figuring that out is really useful information and context. But then the next step is saying, okay, well, what do I do about it? If I'm a target shooter and I have 2 days where my feel is off because it's just a part of my cycle where the hormones are influencing my brain in that way, I can't just say, oh well, I have to say, okay, well, what can I do? Is there something I do in my warm up? Is there something I do nutritionally? Supplements? Like, what is it that will help me get the most out of myself on that day? So I think rather than the idea of doing things like training according to where you are in your menstrual cycle, it's, for me, developing your own cycle resilience. So that means knowing what your cycle and your hormones are doing to you at different times, and then knowing how to get the best out of yourselves on those days. And some days it'll feel really easy and like it's there for the taking, and other days it's harder. And that's kind of life for human beings anyway, isn't it? But this is like an extra layer of information that female athletes can kind of give to help them navigate their training and performance.
And obviously, sports have different sports have different physical expectations and like training programs and just everything surrounding that. Is there anything unique, particularly to motorsports, to women in motorsports, that they have to think about?
I mean, what I love about motorsports is it's not purely physical, and I'm not downplaying the physical nature of the sport, because there is a huge physical element, isn't there? But I think the exciting thing about women in motorsports is that there's this combination of like decision making and the physicality and the fitness, and I think that that's really exciting for a female athlete, because it means that, you know, if you're doing what we call linear sports, and you're running in a straight line, or you're cycling around, you know, a track, it's very reliant on physiological systems. And so you just have to maximize those systems, you know, cardiovascular function, aerobic capacity. Whereas with motorsports, there's so many different parts of the puzzle. And actually, you can turn up different ones and get increased performance. And that might be improved focus or concentration or decision making. And that's not, you know, that's not biologically sort of limited by our sex. And actually, there are real advantages. We just know that, for example, women communicate really well in the sporting environment. They're really good leaders and decision makers. And even if you're in a solo sport, when you're working in a team of people, you've got mechanics and you've got coaches, and that ability to lead into social connections and kind of value those can be really a real benefit in sport. So I love the idea that you've got girls and women in a, you know, predominantly male sport who can bring real strengths, and that's not. I think sometimes that's kind of recognized. It's like we are going to be inferior on every level, and actually, that's not the case at all. I think women will naturally bring some real strength into the role of a driver.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that leads well into the driver development guide that you worked on with F1 Academy. So tell us a little bit more about that. How did that come about? What was the goal of putting that together?
I mean, introducing girls and women into F1 was just such a great opportunity to say, instead of just slotting them into the system that has been really well designed for the guys, why don't we like rewrite the playbook, and so that it really works for the girls and the women that are there, and the academy, you know, the girls progressing in the sport. And that's a really healthy attitude to have, and we were delighted that the sport were taking that approach, rather than just, you know, kind of, I guess, throwing the girls in and then them feeling like, oh, this doesn't feel like even a place I belong, and we don't talk about these things, and, you know, like my body feels like it works differently from theirs. Or so the player handbook was really a way of like outlining some of the really key things that drivers would need to kind of reflect on, develop, and grow over their course of training. And there was some great input from experts across your sport on different aspects: skills, driving, handling. But we've specifically worked around some of those female specific aspects. So we put content in around the menstrual cycle, and absolutely to the point we were just talking about, you know, girls, when they go through puberty, the hormonal shifts are incredible. Like, you go from having essentially no sex hormones, you know, going through your body, to this monthly cycle of ups and downs of two really influential hormones. And even that can feel very alien as a girl who's been able to show up to training, to do sports, to do physical activity, to do driving on any given day, and been like, yeah, this is me. And then suddenly through puberty, she's feeling different, she's thinking different, she's behaving different, her body shape is changing, periods start. There's like a lot going on. So we really wanted to get really good information out that helped girls navigate those bits, because the last thing you want for a talented athlete is those things being the thing that holds her back, or that worries her, or that's filling her headspace. You know, it might sound really simple, but you don't want a driver in a car thinking, oh my gosh, my period product needs changing, and I'm sitting here in this seat and it's uncomfortable and it's leaking, and I've got to make really good decisions, and all I'm thinking about is, oh, this is terrible, because I'm in my first few years of having periods and I just kind of didn't get it right that day. So it's like, how can we give the girls really good information about that, but also signal and signpost that this is a space where we can help you navigate all of those things in this sport. And there's nothing that's kind of off limits. So yes, we're going to teach you to be a great driver, and yes, we're going to teach you, you know, physically how to develop. but also your journey through puberty is going to also be supported. And for girls, that's starting your periods, the influence of hormones, developing breasts, and getting exactly the best sports bra so that you are well supported, and your biomechanics and your posture, which can be hugely affected by breast support, are correct. And that is a really great signal to girls that this is a space where I belong and I'm really accepted as a girl and celebrated as a girl. And I can learn all the other cool stuff about driving, but I'm also having these bits. So we put content in specifically around menstrual cycles, around sports bras and kit, and around fueling, and really leaning into that idea that, you know, food is fuel, and whether it's cognitive function or physical function, food is essential, and really trying to rewrite the narrative, particularly for girls, about that, because often girls will restrict calories, they will restrict, you know, whole food groups just because of certain social influences. And actually, as an athlete, we want to empower them with the idea that if you train, the only way you will adapt and get better is if you've got nourishment in your system to help you do that. When you show up, the only way you're going to be able to make quick decisions and stay focused is by being really well fueled. And just try and shift that narrative from food being associated with body size and shape and how small I can look, to food being this really important battery pack for high performance. So yeah, the handbook was incredible because it just was really female focused, and is kind of the playbook for those girls coming into the sport, you know, really aspiring to get to the top levels, with some great information, but that also nodded to the fact that they were girls, and there were some really female specific things that they could pay attention to.
Yeah, it was really, I love that handbook. I was going through all the like steps and everything, you know, and it's so fun. And it's also such a good idea to have even, you know, the handbook as a sign of like, in such a male dominated sport, women can be here. You know, here's a guide, like they belong in this sport.
Yeah.
They're not outliers. Is there anything, how do you, in such a male dominated sport like racing, get that buy-in from male coaches, male team personnel? You know, there are very few female race engineers and that sort of thing. So how do you do that when you're talking about tailoring, you know, female physiology?
Yeah, I think it's a great question, and it's not. I mean, F1 is really male dominated, but it's not uncommon in sport for that to be the case. We've done a lot of work across the professional women's game in football here in the UK, and there are so many male coaches in the women's game. And in the Olympic system, 10% of head coaches were women and 90% were men.
Wow.
So we've got a lot of guys, and for the most part, those guys are great coaches, and they absolutely want to coach these girls in the best way they can, but no one has ever given them the information. And so one of the things that is our kind of core mission at the Well is, you know, our ideal future, and let's project ourselves forward, it might be many years, but that when you learn to be a coach, and whether that's a football coach or, you know, driving coach, you will be taught about women's bodies or girls' bodies, and how girls experience being female in the context of sport. Like, and that will just be a normal part, because actually as a coach, you are likely to encounter girls in your journey. And at the moment, we spend a lot of time working with coaches to sort of add on to all the great education they've had about sports science and about coaching and about pedagogy, and layer in, like, what does it look like when you're actually coaching a woman, and what other things might you need to consider. And for those guys, it's like, I didn't know that I didn't know half of that, because, you know, I haven't had a female body, I haven't grown up in a female body, and also no one taught it to me when I was doing my training, my qualifications.
Mm-hmm.
And also I'm surrounded by other guys, so how would I know? And then there's also this sort of lack of confidence about getting it right. So you know, when we tell them about the biomechanics of breast movement and how it can affect posture and like muscle activation, and therefore fatigue, and all of the science behind that, like, everyone gets it. They're like, oh, great, okay, and it's really, the solution is the sports bra, so great, we can kind of really cover that. And then the male coaches are like, oh, but have I got to talk to the girls about bras? Like, that feels weird. Like, and yeah, it would be weird. So we then have to work out, okay, what are the sort of safe boundaries of you? And saying sports bra, a sports bra is a really important bit of kit, and giving the science behind why having the right kit is important. feels safe. And I think most guys can kind of get on board with that. But then it's like, actually, you don't have to go shopping with the girls, or you don't have to tell them how to fit the bra. That can be mum, or it can be them empowered with the information, or it can be, like an athlete welfare officer. Like, so use the people in the support team to help with this information. But for the guys, there's this kind of nervousness about what's okay to say. And that's part of our job, is to help them understand where the safe boundaries are, whether it's menstrual health, whether it's pelvic health, or even attitudes around food and the language we use around bodies and food. Like we always try and meet people where they're at. And for guys, that can often be like, I've never worked with girls, so I'm not, I've been able to have banter with boys about food that I could never have with girls about food. And it's like helping them navigate what that looks like. And then also opening up the opportunities of that this presents to them as a coach, but also the real strengths that or the differences in mindsets that they can get more out of their girls. So for example, girls are motivated more by the quality of their relationship with their coach. Boys are motivated more by the quality of their coach. So the guys want a coach who's coached the other people who have won medals or won World Cups or championships. Like, they want to know that they are a good driver, and like that quality is really important. And then that coach can have a real impact on that guy's progress. Girls much more value the relationship that coach builds with them, how much they care about them, how much they understand about their lives beyond driving. If you know that as a coach, you know, with small changes and an investment in the relationship, you can suddenly get more out of your athlete. So I think the other thing we do with coaches, particularly male coaches, is really kind of show them some of the opportunities of changing how they coach slightly to really suit the female mindset and what that could unlock in their athletes.
I love that. I think so much of what you've said, it's like the first step is just having the right information, and then figuring out what to do with that information comes next. But plugging the information gaps just seems to be so crucial, and you are doing the work to make that happen. So thank you for all of that. And Emma, thank you so much for joining us. This has been such an enlightening, interesting conversation, something that I think a lot of people don't talk about but should be talking about. So thank you for your very important work and for sharing your story with us.
And thank you for putting a spotlight on it today. That's been really fabulous. Thank you.